we wait for a few more people to roll in. Welcome. We are College Aid Pro. We'll introduce ourselves in a minute. So we are excited to be here with all you Neshoba parents. Just a couple housekeeping items. We love for you to not be shy and hit us with all of your questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A as opposed to the chat. We might ask you to put something in the chat during the presentation, go ahead and do that, but keep your questions in the Q&A, if you will. We'll remind you. A good thing about the Q&A is if you want to be anonymous, there's a box there that you can check. So if you want to ask something that is a little personal, then you can be anonymous as well. Another thing is tomorrow you will get a recording and the slide deck. So if you get distracted or you want to show your spouse or your kids or whatever, you will have that tomorrow to refer to, and just even to have to refer to ongoing. So don't worry about that. I know we'll probably say that again, because I know that's a common question that parents always want to know. So you will receive that tomorrow. Why don't we just get started here? We might have some more people straggling in, but let's kick this off. So tonight this is basically like your financial aid 101. We're getting you all ready to go on this journey that both Rinda and I have been on personally. That's probably our best credentials today, is that we're parents, right? We're professionals that have been doing this for over a decade. But I have twins that I went through it. They're done with college. And Rinda, you've got one in.
And a freshman in college this year.
Yeah. So we understand from a parent standpoint what you're going through. And our whole goal at College Aid Pro, our mission is literally to end the student debt crisis by empowering families to shop smarter for college. And that's just a fancy way of saying, what we do, what gets me out of bed every day is educating parents, educating students, educating other professionals that are working with families all about this process, because the more you know, the less stressful it is. And then you're able to be proactive instead of when your child's a senior and they're starting to get in and you're getting award letters from colleges and you do a big gulp and maybe have a 4-letter word that you say when you see how much the college is expecting you to pay. That is completely avoidable. And so what we're trying to do is educate you on what's coming down the road and what journey you're on, and how to really, your consumers shopping for college with your kids as you build this college list. So we want to teach you about that. And believe me, it doesn't have to be as stressful as it is for a lot of families. And it's hard enough with your kids. They're getting older. They're ready to be somewhat independent. And so it's hard to navigate that. And when you throw this emotional new chapter coming up combined with your money, and we're talking about a lot of money, it can get pretty stressful. So can you guys just take a minute and then we'll introduce ourselves? Just this, could you please put in the chat? I think we are mostly going to have class of 2024 parents tonight and students, but if you don't mind just popping in the chat, if you're 24 or 25, just so Rinda and I know who we're talking to. I think we're probably going to have mostly 24. Yep. Looks like we're across the board 24. Great. Thank you for that. So I'll just take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Peg Keogh. My background is in the financial industry. And then when my kids hit high school, I kind of did what a lot of you probably did. Like you've been trying to save for years, but then it's like, okay, we got to dig in here. How does this all work? And I was just shocked at how much more complicated it was than when I went through it as a kid. And I kind of had this aha moment where I thought, you know what? I've been doing financial planning and financial work with parents for years. I want to pivot and just focus on this college piece. And I think I can impact families even more with my expertise along with my personal experience. So that's what I did. 2014, I started my own business called Way to the Quad. And I met the founders at College Aid Pro a year in and actually beta tested their software with them and knew them for a while. We always talked about partnering. And long story short, in 2021, it just made sense for me to join College Aid Pro. I was getting a little sick of flying solo and having to wear marketing and tech hats. And this is the stuff I really love doing. So it enabled me to really spend more time on what I wanted to do. So that's how I got here. And as I shared, parent of two, have gone through this process, and it wasn't super stressful because I was an informed consumer. So Rinda, why don't you take a minute, introduce yourself, and then we will get started.
Thanks, Peg. Hi, everybody. I'm Renda Wilk. And much like Peg, I have a background in financial planning. And just prior to focusing on college planning, I was a financial coach. And I was working with so many people on the other side of this college decision where they had the student loans that they were trying to pay off and manage while they were also trying to grow a family or buy a house, etc. And I realized, man, I really need to get to these people before they get to this position where they're stressed out about their money after they graduate from college. So that's why I chose to, do this. Is I really feel like this is how I can be the most help, for young adults right now. So yeah, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you about financial aid and paying for college.
All right, let me share my screen and let's get started here. So as I said before, we are College Aid Pro, and that's our mission. And here's Rinda and I. Not my favorite picture of myself, but I never like pictures of myself. So you all should have gotten an email this morning encouraging you to set up your MyCap account. So you guys are super fortunate because your school has actually paid for you to have our premium account, and we call it Scholar. So Rinda, if you could just pop that link in the chat, the mycap.collegeaidpro.com. If you go there and you just click on, you're actually going to click on set up for free. And then after, and maybe a bunch of you have already done this. And if you have, great. I'm just going to take 1 second on this. But after you hit set up for free, it's going to ask you to set up a username and password. After you do that, you're going to get to this page. And you want to select the Scholar plan, which is $149. But when you hit select plan and go through the prompts, there will be a place to put in your coupon. And that's where you're going to put in this coupon, Nishoba 24, that's down here. And that will back out the $149. You just go through those prompts, and then you're going to be asked about 3 or 4 minutes of onboarding questions that help us actually calculate what's called your EFC that we're going to talk about in a minute. So if you've done that, it's great to have that open if you have another laptop or something next to you, because I'm going to go in there as part of teaching you and show you a sample family. And then you can actually be looking at your unique situation. If you want to quickly kind of set it up now, you can, or after, but you have this tool at your fingertips. So I really, really encourage you to set that up and upgrade to the Scholar so you can put unlimited colleges, and you'll actually be able to upload award letters when your kids are seniors. Very useful tool that you can use through the whole journey. And it's great that your school purchased the licenses so you guys have that. So let's get into our content here. So Rinda, I will let you start here.
Thank you. All right. So let's get, like Peg said, the meat and potatoes, what you guys came here to learn about. Most of you have probably heard that the cost of college is kind of crazy these days. I'm pushing, in some cases, thank goodness, not all cases, pushing $90,000 a year and down. So, that's the sticker price. That's the cost of attendance. And when we talk about cost of attendance, we're talking about tuition, room and board, fees, etc. But you might have also heard that almost no one pays that sticker price. And when you're first starting out, it can be super confusing to figure out, okay, so how do I not pay that sticker price, right? There's 3 main ways that schools incentivize students to attend their school by lowering that cost. So the first way is the one you probably hear the most about, need-based grants. This is free money you get. It could be federal aid, state aid, or from the school's endowment. But this is why you fill out those financial aid forms, the FAFSA, maybe the CSS profile as well, to see if you're going to qualify for any need-based grants. And then the second bucket we often talk about here at College Aid Pro are the merit-based scholarships. And the great thing about merit-based scholarships is that you don't have to have need to qualify for a merit scholarship. It's also free money. And the other great thing about merit scholarships is that it's usually for all 4 years of school. So you don't have to reapply every year. And yeah, if you could be from a family that brings home 30,000 a year or 3 million a year, it doesn't matter, right? All students can try to go after this merit money. Also free money that you don't have to pay back. The third bucket that schools use to try to help kids pay for college is the self-help bucket. This is not free money, but it can be an important part of your overall strategy for paying for college. So this is your student loans and work study. So obviously you got to pay the loans back. Work study, you have to apply for the job, get the job, work to get that money. So not free, and it's usually not your main strategy for paying for college, but it definitely can help. And if you want to move forward for me, Peggy, I might even be able to do it myself. Let's talk a little bit about those need-based grants and how schools determine how much they're going to give you a need-based aid. And the first thing they have to establish is what your need is. And the way that they do that is the first number you need is that sticker price, that cost of attendance. And then they're going to subtract from that your expected family contribution, or EFC, which is also becoming the SAI this year, or the student aid index, but it's the same thing. It's basically, if you're filling out the FAFSA, it's that number that's calculated that says this is how much your family is expected to be able to contribute to college. Doesn't mean you can contribute that much, but that's the number that they calculate. So that's the number the schools look at. When it comes to CSS profile, it can be a little bit different how they calculate that number. And we'll talk more about those two forms later on, but just know that they start with the cost of attendance. They subtract out how much they expect you to be able to pay, and the rest is your need. So if the cost of attendance is $80,000 a year, and they say, hey, we're expecting you to be able to pay $30,000 a year, then your need is $50,000 a year. That doesn't mean you're going to get $50,000 off the cost for that school. It's just a starting point that they use to then determine how they're going to hand out their need-based aid. Thank you, Peg. Okay, so another question a lot of families have is, well, how do I know what my EFC or SAI is? How do I know how they're going to look at my family financially and decide how much need I have or how much I can pay? They're looking at mainly at two things: your assets and your income. And it's both the parent assets and the student assets and income, and the student assets and income. So when it comes to assets, pretty much everything is considered an asset except your retirement account. So you want to make sure to never include your 401k, 403b, IRA, Roth, IRA, et cetera. Those type of accounts, never include those in your total asset values. And for the FAFSA, you don't include your main home. But if you have a rental house or a second home, then you do have to include the equity in that home as an investment or one of your assets. And then let's see, another thing I want to mention is 529 plans. So how do they play into this? Well, even though the student might be the beneficiary, or probably is the beneficiary of the 529, it's considered a parent-owned asset unless the grandparents or someone else owns it, and that's a different story. But it's a 529s held, by the parent, or parent-owned assets, which is good for you guys because the parent assets count a lot less towards your, they hurt you a lot less. Okay. So they're a smaller percentage of parent-owned assets gets counted towards the amount that you're expected to be able to contribute to the cost of college. So, and you have to add up all your 529s. If you have 3 kids and 3 different 529s, they're going to want you to include the value of all 3 of those 529s when you're including the assets. A lot of people ask us about debt. Hey, you know what? Yeah, I've got some money in the bank, or maybe I have a high income, but I also have, a lot of debt. Well, how does that play in? It doesn't come into play with the financial aid forms at this point. And, you may have heard the FAFSA is changing this year. It could, maybe come into play in the future. At least there might be a question or two about it. But at this point, it's not asked. However, that doesn't mean that any debt you have can't be used in the appeals process later on in the college planning process, for you to go back to the school and say, hey, I've got this special circumstance with this debt that I owe, and maybe get them to knock off a little bit more from the cost for you. That's a strategy that you can work with. Another thing to keep in mind with your homes, when you're valuing your home, so like I said, your main home is your main residence, not factored in for the FAFSA, but it will be asked about for the CSS profile if you have to fill that out. So either that or a second home or rental home is you are allowed to use what is called the IRS quick sale value. So basically, if you had to sell your home tomorrow to pay for college, you're not going to get full price, full market value for it. You're going to have to pay closing costs and real estate agent fees, and probably get a little bit less for it because you're trying to move it fast. So we encourage you, you can pretty safely knock off 15 to 20% from the total fair market value when you're putting that in the financial aid forms.
Yeah, this piece I'll just add, or reiterate that you always want to be honest. But you want to find the lowest defensible market value for your home. I was working with a guy about a month ago, and I looked at his numbers and I'm like, is your home really only worth that? And he said, yeah, there's I have comps from homes down the street. And I said, that's what you're going to need to send to the school, because on paper, it looks like your home should be valued more. And the colleges can go to Zillow, right? Zillow usually is a higher number. So you always want to be honest, but this is a piece, like Renda said, that comes into play with the CSS profile that we'll talk about in a few minutes, that, some of these colleges will look at your equity. So your market value minus any liabilities, HELOC, traditional mortgage, as like liquid assets, which is crazy, but some of them will, and it can really shoot up your EFC/SAI. So the only other thing I'll add here is that assets, when you're filling out these forms, are literally assessed, if you're being super persnickety, the day you hit submit. So if the market tumbles, I don't know what the market did today, I haven't looked on my phone, but I kind of joke, but in a way, if you've got a lot of stock in a portfolio and the market's tanking, you can look at the value at the end of the day, and that's when you're hitting submit. So it's a very current value of your assets.
Yep. Thanks, Peggy. Okay. So when you are filling out the financial aid form, another important thing to remember is that you are going to be reporting the income from your tax return from the prior year. And what does that mean? So if your student is starting school in 2024, in the fall of 2024, that means you're using your 2022 tax return to answer all the questions. So in that, most of it comes from the adjusted gross income on your tax return, your 1040 or AGI. And there is an allowance that they give you against which they don't, factor into your expected family contribution. So it's not a super straightforward number. They do some calculations behind the scenes to lower that a little bit, but it's mostly your adjusted gross income. So, you can kind of think about decisions you're making during the year. If you're doing something that might kind of artificially increase your income or make it look like you had higher income from one year to the next, for example, like an IRA conversion, Roth conversion, or something like that. You just want to keep that in mind, because there are ways to kind of handle that in the financial aid process. But if you can keep your income looking a little bit lower, especially for that base year, you might do yourself a little bit favor, because most of the expected family contribution is, the biggest factor is your income, bottom line. So if you're able at all to keep your income looking lower for that year, the base year, then that'll help you a little bit.
Yeah, and for this audience, you're all 2024. Obviously, the 22 tax year is over.
Yeah, it's over.
So it is what it is. So if you did a Roth conversion or you have a big capital gain, don't stress. You can reach out to the college, and that's something we'll talk about. That's down the road. Through an appeal process, you can always do that. But just going forward, if you can avoid that stuff, especially for the first year, which we call the base year, you just kind of setting yourself up a little better. But sometimes it's not avoidable. We're both planners, Rinda and I, so you don't want financial aid to rule the roost. Any decisions you make shouldn't be made in a silo. You got to look at the tax ramifications and your portfolio, just everything, not just financial aid. Because somebody just asked a great question and said, should I pay down debt? What are assets assessed at? Great question. That's a good strategy sometimes, to pay down debt. But I said, I'd have to know more about your situation. You don't want to pay down all your debt and then say, oh, I got to pay 30,000. That's my share. I don't have any money now. Now I got to take out expensive loans. So that's my point, to kind of make a holistic decision on these things. But that's how it works. And students, as the slide said, can make over 7,000, and that's going to keep going up. So for most kids, most kids aren't sitting on trust funds or have huge income. If they do, then that's a driver. But to Rinda's point, she's saying a lot of the stuff that I always say is, that's by far the biggest driver is parental income. So but what if you're sitting there and you already have your MyCap account set up, or you're just kind of doing some math in your head and thinking, you know what, I'm going to have a high EFC SAI. Well, then it's that second bucket that Rinda talked about on one of those slides in the aqua box, that merit aid could potentially be the name of the game for discounts for your family. And that's true. I don't know about you, Rinda, but through the years, I'd say at least half, if not more, of the families I've worked with, they don't have eligibility for need-based aid at a lot of the schools they're looking at. But paying 90,000, even 70,000 a year times 4 with inflation factor, we're over $250,000 big time here. So we're talking about a lot of money. So it's important to understand how merit aid works. Remember, being an informed consumer and understanding this process, like I said at the beginning. So there are some schools in this country that give out merit aid to every student that applies. That's not the norm. The flip side is there are some schools in this country, about 100, that give no merit aid. So you're looking at the Ivies and Stanford and MIT and a lot of the NESCAC schools. So if you have $100,000 EFC and you build a list with Middlebury and Tufts and Cornell and Stanford and MIT, well, if your child can get in, which is a huge accomplishment, that's great, but you're going to be writing full check. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have those schools on the list, but you should do it with your eyes wide open and understand that everybody that's walking around those campuses that has aid, it's need-based aid. They're excellent at meeting need-based aid, 100%, right? The Harvard, Princeton, but they are not going to give a kid a scholarship for having a killer GPA and perfect SATs. They attract those kind of kids. They don't need to give out the merit scholarship. So definitely keep that in mind. So it's really important to understand how these schools give out scholarships. If you look at number 5 on our slide, this is a bit of I'm jumping ahead a little in the process, but when we work with families, we will quite often encourage them. And if Matt, who presents with me a lot, he would use the words, I make them apply to competing schools. So even if they don't say a student really loves RIT, right? But visited and didn't like WPI. Well, those are competing schools, right? They're trying to grab the same students. We will say, hey, apply to WPI, even though you don't want to go, because down the road you could get a better merit award if the student's in that pocket from WPI, and then we can appeal and play that off of whatever RIT gives you. So that's a really forwardly looking, understanding how the college basically gives these discounts that Rinda talked about at the beginning. They're all on sale. It's just a matter of how they're discounting. And so understanding this can really help. So what I want to do is pop into MyCap, and let's just look at a sample family, because it helps learning when you actually see an actual, it's not just theory. Now we're looking at a sample family. And if you have this open, you can be looking at your dashboard. So what you see up here are, you see 3 different EFCs. Ignore this consensus EFC. It's going to go away. It's actually a group of colleges that disbanded. And so we're going to be removing that. They look at some of the parts of the formula in a very specific way. And honestly, they didn't always follow that. So I'm kind of glad they went away. But let's just focus on the federal and the institutional EFC. So federal is FAFSA. So we are going to talk about the FAFSA in a minute. So the schools, most schools only require the FAFSA, and they're going to calculate their, what we call the federal EFC, and it's going to be called SAI starting in December when that FAFSA comes out, because that's one of the changes that Rinda already touched on. So this family, they think they can afford $55,000. The institutional EFC, that comes off of the second form, the CSS profile. So a lot of the private schools use this. There's over 200. There's a few publics on there like Michigan and UNC Chapel Hill, UVA. Most of them are private. So if you look at the schools I have up here, Northwestern and Stanford require the CSS profile. So they're looking at this institutional EFC. The biggest difference between these two is, for most families, is their primary home equity. So remember when Rinda said that the FAFSA, not even asked about, the home you live in is off the table, the equity. But that's not the case with the CSS profile. They ask you the market value of your home, when you bought it, what your liabilities are. And some schools will even factor in all of your equity as if it's a liquid asset, which it is not, because no bank will allow you to do that. But be that as it may, they do. Now, I have 2 examples I've strategically picked to show you guys. Northwestern looks at most of it. So you can see sticker price of almost 88,000, and they're paying almost full sticker price. But look at Stanford, same form, but Stanford has a policy that they don't look at home equity. They don't expect parents to go that deep into their portfolio, which I think is great. So dramatic difference in the EFC/SAI. And so you can see they're paying half price. That is built into this MyCap tool that you guys have access to. So we know this, so we're building it into these outputs. And as we said at the beginning, you look at these sticker prices, as Rinda said, they really are irrelevant, right? Chapman here, which is out in my neck of the woods, I'm outside of Seattle here. They're a FAFSA only school, but if you look in here, we're projecting a merit scholarship for this student that's actually more than their need. And so they're going to get this merit award, which is great because it's for 4 years, like Rinda explained. Look over here at UMass Amherst. Well, this family is a Massachusetts kid, so they're going to pay full price. So what's interesting here is Stanford is not, it's $9,000. It's not nothing, but it's a heck of a lot different than the $50,000 difference. And so this is what we're trying to help you see. This is so important for you to understand. So when you're building the college list, you can have affordability for your family and your specific student in mind. And then at each school, like I just clicked, we've got all this information for you to look at. We've got admissions data, so you can quickly see where your child falls as far as GPA and test scores. And then we've kind of got the business plan, how this school functions from a financial standpoint, only requires the FAFSA, how much need they need. And then the percent of kids that get merit aid, which is huge, followed by what's the average merit aid. Because some schools you might see a number here and then the average is 2,000. It's like, wow, that doesn't really help me on a sticker price of 50. Like, this is all super valuable information for you. And then we've got all the merit. And if we can project it, because the college is transparent, we will, but you have that database at your fingertips to click and then it'll show up. So a lot more in here, but I wanted to jump in here just to educate you around what we're showing you on the slides. The last piece I'm going to show you, because this is, I love this because it's, you know, it gets even deeper in the planning and the affordability. But then we take you the next step and say, so your 1-year cost is whatever it is. Well, this is a 4-year degree, right? And hopefully not more than 4 years. So we multiply it by 4, put in an inflation factor, and then we say, okay, how much can you afford? When you onboard, we're going to ask you that. And if you don't know, that's okay. We're starting to get you to think about it. And that's what really matters. So you take the total sticker price minus the endowment money that you get, and then we bring in what you can afford, and then that gap, it can be a funding gap. Here we're calling it total loans. There's other ways to cover that gap, but we want you to understand this. At Stanford, there's no gap. At UMass Amherst, no gap. But over here, there's a significant gap. And if that's all loans, what does that look like on a 10-year and a 25-year? And my sample, if Shannon's an art major, what's an estimate of her take-home pay graduating with that degree from that college? Just so you can see order of magnitude, is this an affordable school? And we'll give you caution and ideal and good, you know, markers too, to try and help you. So, and then down the road, when you get award letters, these last tabs over here, that's senior year, when you can hop in and use the tool. So as I said at the beginning, we know the journey that you're on, and we, you know, we're going to take you through each step basically. So hopefully we're taking some of the stress out of this for you. So we got a couple more slides here on merit. Rinda hit on a lot of this already, but you'll have it in your deck tomorrow to review as well. Okay, so I am going to turn it back to you, Rinda.
All right, thank you. And just a reminder, if you have questions, if you could pop them in the Q&A, it's easier for us to manage whether we've answered them or not. And someone put in, how do you calculate your EFC? And I'll just go ahead and say the easiest thing for you to do right now is to go ahead and get into MyCap. And by answering your profile questions, it's going to kind of do a pretty close estimate actually for you. That's the easiest way. But the other thing is, once you do your FAFSA next year, well, it's this year, but next school year, you'll get the official numbers. So, and to that end, how do you do that? How do you apply for financial aid? Well, no two schools are alike, right? So as Peg alluded to, some schools require the FAFSA, some require the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And so you're just going to be paying attention to the schools you're applying to and what they require. One thing I want to say again now, and hopefully a couple more times before this presentation is over, keep up with your deadlines. I strongly encourage you to go ahead and set up a calendar that you and your student can share and start putting all the deadlines on there. Don't only put the deadlines, put, you know, a reminder 2 weeks out and maybe a reminder 2 weeks before that, right? So that you can make sure to get started on all of your college applications, whether it's financial aid or, you know, the college apps on time and not have to do things at the last minute. So it's very important that you keep up with the deadlines to have the best chance at getting a good result. So like I said, every college requires the FAFSA. Even if you know you're not going to qualify for aid, need-based aid, some schools require you to fill out their financial aid forms before you can even be considered for merit aid as well. So go ahead and just fill them out. You don't want to miss out on a merit scholarship because you failed to fill out your financial aid forms. And there could be also like a proprietary form that you could be asked to fill out, but it's probably going to have similar information to what's on the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So you have to, you really want to make sure that when you start the college application process, like I said, you have the calendar, you put the deadlines in there, and make sure you are proactive about keeping up with what's required. Because most schools are going to communicate primarily with the student, either through their email address, or maybe they have an online portal that the student will have a username and password for. So, you can determine what's best between you and your kids, but make sure that you have some way of kind of helping them stay on top of it, because you don't want to leave any step of the process out, for sure, in this.
Yeah, I know a lot of kids, emails like super antiquated and they don't look at it. You just want, you want to make sure that your kids are on top of that. They're forwarding stuff to you, because they might be sending really important information. They'll usually remind you if forms aren't in, but sometimes it's not before the priority deadline. So if you miss deadlines, and your kids are getting messages and not relaying them, you just kind of want to have a sit down meeting on that, because you've got to be proactive. It's not really the college's job to make sure you're getting everything in. And there are a bunch of pieces, things that you might have to submit. You will have to submit after submitting the CSS profile, especially. So,
and I just have 2 tips I'll throw out there. One, maybe consider setting up a brand new email address that both you and your student have access to, so that you can both be monitoring it and only use that email address for all of your college planning. And then the other one, I will say, if you're, have somewhat reluctant child, maybe not wanting to stay on top of things as much as you would like, maybe have like a weekly meeting at a set time, set place every week, where you just sit down and review, where are we at with this, where are we at with that. And that way kind of takes the stress out of you as parents to be reminding them every day or every time you think of it. It's like, okay, we're going to cover it in our meeting, and then the rest of the week you could just enjoy spending time with them, because it won't be long and they'll be flying.
yep, there's some golden advice from a mom. I can tell there's a little bit of personal experience there.
Definitely some personal experience there. Okay, so more specifically, how do we apply for the FAFSA? So this year is going to be a little different, because as I mentioned before, they're changing some things about the form. And for this year only, the form normally opens up right on October 1st every year. Well, they've already announced that it's not going to be available until sometime in December, and we don't know when yet. So stay tuned for that. But it's going to be accessible again sometime in December this year. Like I said before, it's going to be requiring you to use your prior tax year. So this year, 2024, you're going to be using the 2022 tax return. And one thing you're going to have before you start filling this out, you're going to want to go in and apply for the FSA ID. And this is a little bit of a process, and Peg and I were just talking before this that we've even heard that with the changes this year, they might be changing the way you apply for the FSA ID and making it a little bit more complicated, but we're not sure yet. So stay tuned for that as well. But it's basically a way for them to establish that you are who you are. So they're going to ask you for like social security number, and some other personal identifying information, so that they can verify who you are. And then it takes a couple of days. That's why you want to do it a little bit ahead of time and get your FSA ID. And it's basically how you e-sign your form. And so the student needs one, and one of the parents needs one. And one thing I would like to talk about, another change that's coming down the line this year, is with custodial parents. So if you have a part of a 2-household family where your students has, parents who are either separated or divorced or for whatever reason, you're dealing with two households. When it comes to the FAFSA, FAFSA only includes the student's financial information and one parent. And if they're married, that person that they're married to, if they're remarried is what I'm trying to say there. Sorry. So the way that they look at that now, it used to be whoever the student lived with more days in the year would be the custodial parent who was included on the FAFSA. Now it's going to be different. It's going to be whoever provide the most financial support to the student. So, there's some strategy that can go into that, because what is financial support? Well, it could be child support, but it's also a portion of your mortgage if you're, putting a roof over that kid's head, or, your utilities, or you're, paying for sports and extracurricular activities, so it will behoove you to, like we always say, be honest. But if you can justifiably, honestly say that the lower earning parent, or the parent that would have the lowest EFC, is the custodial parent, that is a strategy would help you a bit. But again, certainly not telling anyone to make up numbers or lie on their FAFSA here.
Yeah, no, we're not
Go ahead,
counseling that, but it's basically it used to be where the child slept the most nights, and you could change that, right? If you learn this in enough time, you could change that. And they made it so there's a little bit of ambiguity there, right? It's not clear cut. So as Rinda said, it's not necessarily who provides the child support, because if they spend 80% of the time with you, you're paying the mortgage, you're paying the electric, you can create documentation, and if you can make it work while being honest, why not, right? You got to play the cards you have. So that's a new change. You have older kids, it remains to be seen what they're going to do with kids that are already in school. There's been nothing around grandfathering or anything. So we'll see. And you guys are in our community. So as Rinda said, stay tuned. We're hoping it's December 1, but we just don't know. So the minute that we know, and the minute that they get clearer about the FSA ID, that's the link that you've always used. But as Rinda said, lately they've come out and said, hey, we might change that process. So we all kind of have to be a little fluid here, because we don't know. We really don't know what's going to happen. And somebody asked a great question. So the parental FSA ID, you can use that if you have quadruplets, right? That's yours. Each student will need to get an FSA ID, and keep those somewhere safe with your security questions once you set them up, because you're going to need it every year. You're going to submit the FAFSA every year for them to reassess your need. So you'll be a pro by the end, because you'll be so used to doing the FAFSA. Okay. So this is just a takeaway for you guys. We, as I think we already said, in the fall, we'll be doing line by lines of these forms. We will get really deep into what to do, what not to do, how to fill out these forms effectively. We hit a couple of this stuff already around. Rinda talked about no retirement accounts are disclosed, the balances, and about 529s, but that's for your reference. So let me talk about the CSS profile for a few minutes. So as we said, this is the other form that about 200, 250, mostly private schools are going to require along with the FAFSA, not in lieu of the FAFSA. So they are going to calculate a second EFC/SAI, and I don't know if they're going to call it an SAI, because they don't follow the federal methodology. Remember when I was in my cap and we had a federal EFC and an institutional EFC? The CSS profile is where the institutional EFC comes from. And we've already mentioned that one of the biggest differences between those two methodologies is your primary home. And they will ask about it, even though Stanford is going to ignore it. They're still going to ask about it. And different colleges are going to include it in different ways in that calculation on the asset side. So this is definitely something you can appeal on. If you get award letters, 9 months from now for your child and something's wonky. The more you know, the more you'll be able to do that. And that's something that we help. We're just finishing our season of doing that with families one-on-one, helping with appeals. This form it's the current length of the FAFSA, it's 3 times as long. So, one of our colleagues, Bill Rabbit at CAP at College Aid Pro, always says, well, you need a glass of wine or two, or if you're a beer person like me, a beer or two to do the FAFSA, but you probably need the whole 6 or the whole bottle of wine, jokingly, right, to get through the CSS. It's a pain. It's a pain, just to be completely honest. It's much more invasive and they ask a lot more questions. We will coach you very specifically about the best way to complete it in the fall, because you don't have to answer all the questions. But some key differences here: divorced or separated families, 2 household families. We've already talked about the custodial parent submitting with the FAFSA. The CSS actually has 2 different forms. There's a custodial, the regular CSS profile, then there's a non-custodial CSS profile. So they are going to expect both parents, the custodial parent and the student, and then the non-custodial parent, to submit forms through College Board, which is the nonprofit that does the SAT and APs, separately. So it's completely private, your information, but they get both parents' information. And then the different colleges are going to use all that information and calculate their own proprietary EFC. The FAFSA is very transparent. When you hit submit on the FAFSA, print to PDF, or print if you like to print, and put it in your file, that confirmation page, it will say your EFC right on it. That does not happen when you submit the CSS, right? These colleges are all going to calculate different EFCs, and there could be a $10,000 or $15,000 swing depending on if they, some of these schools don't look at the non-custodial parent, just like a Stanford doesn't look at home equity. So there can be big differences. If you are a business owner, they are going to look at your business in depth. After you submit the CSS, they will reach out, either they will, or a company called IDOC, which is tied in with College Board, will say, hey, now please upload all of your tax return. If you have an S Corp, we want to see your 1120S, your W-2s, and they're going to do a deep dive into your finances. And if you are a business owner just planting the seed, they love to look at Schedule E's and Schedule C's and your S Corp returns and say, look at some of the expenses that the IRS is good with and say, we're going to throw that out. So that elevates your income, that elevates your EFC/SAI. So these are all things you can dig in when you get award letters and appeal on, but just realize that very much can happen. They know a lot about you after you submit the CSS profile and all the documents that they require. And if you don't submit them, then they can't give you the award letter. And these schools will use this institutional EFC to give their endowment money. That money that Rinda was talking about, the need-based grants that are from endowment. And sometimes some of these schools want it on file for merit, not as often as they want the FAFSA on file, but sometimes. So that's how the CSS profile works. You just want to understand, these colleges are nonprofits, but they really are big businesses. And they've got algorithms running in the background, and they're all about the net revenue. They know they're not going to get sticker price, the $85,000 from each family. They'll get some, and they love those families. And then they know they're going to have families that they're going to have to shell out a lot of aid to, and then everything in between. But if they get net revenue of 50,000, they've got their yield targets of what they're looking for, and it's big business behind the scenes. I'm not saying that in a negative way, but just realize that. I know a woman who's the head of admissions and financial aid at a smaller liberal arts college, and she said at a conference a couple of years ago, she said, you know what, if I had to do it again, I would get an MBA instead of my master's in counseling, because so much of what I'm doing is around numbers, right? And that's just the reality. That's just the reality of this process. So another kind of cheat sheet here about CSS profile mistakes. You'll get this tomorrow so you can review it. So before we conclude here, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about these FAFSA changes that we brought up. So in December 2020, within the COVID, I forget what the whole bill was called. The COVID, do you remember what it was called, Brenda? I forget what it was called, but it was the big package that they passed. Within there, the FAFSA Simplification Act was embedded in there. So it made some key differences to the FAFSA, which is why, as Rinda said, that they pushed out the date because they're trying to get these changes in. So for low-income families, they've made some changes that are amazing. The Pell Grant, which is the federal need-based grant, is going up. It's going to be easier for families to get, higher income level families. That's all great stuff. They made the divorce change that we've already talked about, but there is one change that's going to hit a lot of families pretty hard, and it would have hit me with twins pretty hard. So if you have more than one child in school at once, right now, how it works with these FAFSA schools is they say, well, you have a certain amount of assets, certain amount of income. Well, you can afford to pay, say, $80,000 a year. Well, when you have two kids in school, you can afford $80,000. So we're going to almost divide that by two. So it might be $42,000 for each child, right? Because that income and that asset base can afford what it can afford. That's the way it's always been. They are changing that to where you will not get a break if you have two kids in college. So if you have an $80,000 EFC, you will have that for each child. This is a really big change for families. Now, I will say, remember, the CSS profile schools do not have to follow this. And the way they do it now is they reduce the EFC by about 30 to 40%. They all have their own percentages of how they do that. And what we've been hearing behind the scenes from these schools, because we have the director of Sloan School of Business financial aid at MIT. He's one of our consultants that does hourlies with our families. And we know heads of financial aid, a guy at Harvard School of Medicine, and they're telling us, you know what, we don't think we're going to drop that. We think we're going to keep doing it the way we do it. Well, that's a planning opportunity, right? Because a CSS profile school, if you've got twins or you have a junior and a senior in high school, that might end up, you might end up having a few years where you get a nice reduction in the EFC that you're not going to get if that comes through with these FAFSA changes. And with that in mind, when this first came out back in, when we started learning about this in 2021, we were just floored. So our colleague, Matt Carpenter, quickly shot a video and went on change.org and put this petition in. And Rinda, if you can just pop that link in the chat, if you, we're just asking everybody and anybody we know to sign this petition, even if you just have one child, just pay it forward. Some of your friends are going to benefit. If they're telling us if we can get up to about 100,000 signatures, I think we're at about 70 because this screen print's old, that will get some of these decision makers, these lawmakers to take notice. We're really hoping that we can do something about this. But when you're doing your planning, you should really count on this happening. That's the most conservative way to plan. And when you're in your MyCap, we have put that in. So if you have twins, you're not going to get that credit. Or if you have a 2023 child and a 2024, your EFC will be lower. Well, no, actually, flip it. Like, if you're getting an advantage, we'll give you that for the 23-24 school year, but all these changes go into place in the 24-25 school year. So we would love it if you would go on there, take the 5 minutes, click on the petition, and just share that link with all your buddies, because the more the merrier. You know, we maybe can affect some change there, because we're all kind of scratching our heads on that change. I know some of the rationale behind it, but I don't think Congress really understood how this is really going to hurt a lot of families and make college even less affordable. So we're trying to do our best to overturn that. So last thing here, you're going to get this slide. All I'm going to say here, because this is way ahead in your journey, it's after your kids get accepted and you get what's called financial aid award letters. It will educate you all on that through webinars. You can appeal. And we've both mentioned this a couple times. Appealing is you get your package and you reach out to the college, and you can appeal for need-based aid, and you can also appeal for merit aid. So different process. You're appealing to different parts of the college or university, but I just want to plant the seed that you can appeal. And we will, that's a whole webinar literally in and of itself. And we've just, as I said earlier, finished that process with families. So that's coming down the road for everybody. First, you got to get the financial aid forms in. That's that, start to build that college list and get it finalized with affordability in mind. And then the financial aid forms will come. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, the CSS profile goes live on October 1st. We don't expect that to change. And little intel, it usually goes live before October 1st. So I'm always in there checking for the end of September because I got to get in there and shoot my line by line for all of you. So you have like an evergreen webinar or video on it. So it usually goes live a little earlier, and that's going to be an important form because some of the FAFSA schools might ask you to submit that so they can start giving you an idea, because the colleges are going to have to figure, they're used to having FAFSA information November 1 for like early decision kids, and the FAFSA isn't even going to be live. So the colleges are figuring out how they're going to handle this too. But just realize that you definitely can appeal, but that's down the road. So really, if Rinda and I have done our job tonight, what definitely set up your MyCap account and get into this process. Keep the ball rolling, because from one parent to another, if you say, oh, this was a wonderful webinar, and you put it on the pile and I'll get to that later, we're all busy, right? And you want to be involved in this process. We have different ways we can support you besides being in our software. We'll send you an email tomorrow with some information about that. That's not the point of the webinar tonight. So we can guide you if you're overwhelmed and you want some help from the expert team that we have. So we'll send you that information tomorrow, but definitely set up your account. As Rinda said, you're going to get some good estimates of your EFC, and we just keep making the tool better and better. We're constantly, updating. We're updating how colleges do things. So I can't encourage you enough to take advantage of that. And we will, in the email tomorrow, we will talk about our free resources. We have office hours every other Monday at 7 Eastern. Myself, Dan, it could be Rinda one week, and you just sign up. It's a recurring webinar. You register once. You can sorry for the noise. You can ask a question. Sometimes they're pretty full, so we can't always get to everybody's questions. A lot of parents hang out the whole hour. They listen, they learn from what other parents are asking. So that's completely free resource. We have Facebook, we have YouTube. So all those links will be in the email tomorrow. We'll send you a nice landing page with all those free resources that are available. So let me stop sharing, and we've got a couple minutes here, and let me see. How do you find out if the school is a CSS required school? When you set up your MyCap account, when you go into the school, remember when I clicked on Chapman? I can just share my screen really quickly and show you. When you're on your dashboard over here, you can click on more info and then scroll down to the financial aid caret. If it says federal, that means they're a FAFSA school. If it says, let's just go look at Northwestern real quick. I think it says institutional and CSS profile, but that's how you know. Oh, you know what? Sorry, this one's consensus. So this one, if it says consensus, it's CSS too. That's the one I told you is going to go away. But if you look at, I don't think Stanford is consensus. So let's look. It probably just says, institutional IM. So that means CSS. If it doesn't say FAFSA, then you know that the CSS profile is required. So that's how you know that. And let me see, there's a couple. Oh, that's what you put in chat. Yeah. One other thing, another free event that we're putting on, and let me just grab the link and I'm going to pop it in here for you. We're doing a boot camp next week. So I am putting the link to everyone in the chat. This is Monday through Thursday, and each day we'll have a topic. It's at noon Eastern, but it'll be recorded. So if you can't make it because it's the middle of the workday, no problem. If you're registered, you'll get the recording. If there's a slide deck, you'll get that as well, just like tonight, you'll get that tomorrow. So recommend that you sign up for that. There's some stuff about the SAT and ACT, and we're going to be doing a financial aid one on Monday that honestly, it'll be a lot of what you guys got on your own today. So if you want to skip Monday, you could potentially skip Monday, unless you want to hear it all again to kind of get it solidified. But that's another event that we're doing. So I encourage you to register for that. You can always check out the recordings at your leisure. And if they're helpful, great. So anything else you want to add, Rinda, before we sign off here? We're 1 minute over. We're pretty good here.
Somebody put in the chat a question about 529 plan. So I'll just say, if you have a 529 plan, it doesn't matter if you're using it for school or not in any given year. If you have it, it is part of your assets and you do need to include it.
Yeah, and if you, as Rinda said earlier, technically, if you have 4 kids and you have 529s, because they're owned by the parent, unless somebody else owns them, in which you don't disclose it, like Rinda said, you really need to put all of them. But I've had situations where parents have sizable amount of money saved in a 529 for another student. You can appeal that and let them know, hey, I've got 4 kids, 300,000 of that, I've got 100,000 for each one of them. 300,000 of that is off the table. Here's statements to prove the registration, da, 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 da. May work, may not. But yeah, you do need to, even if you, as Rinda said, even if you're not using it, they're looking at the whole asset pool that they think you have available to pay for school. If you choose to use it or not, that's your choice, right? But they're going to include all of it in there, basically. And there's a small allowance on the federal methodology. And then it's assessed for the FAFSA schools, it's 5.64%. For the CSS, it's 5%. And actually the CSS, their methodology, they have much more generous allowances for the assets. They pull off some money knowing you have 4 kids and assuming you saved. It might not be as much as you saved, but they do have allowances. So that's how that works. How can I get the recording? We will be sending that out tomorrow along with the slide deck. So even no worries on coming in late. You will be all set tomorrow, and you can use the slide deck as a reference as well. So, all right. Well, we hope that I'm pretty sure everybody probably got at least one nugget out of this presentation. So hopefully this is getting you on the road to being that informed consumer. And really the last thing I want to share is, when you understand all of this, then you can sit down with your child and you can have the conversation around, hey, this is whatever you want to share. You know, I did it with my 2. I'm like, we have 529s and we have prepaid, and this is what we're willing to spend per year. And my son had 2 schools at the end. One was a private school. He ended up going to Indiana University. I knew he'd be happier there. I didn't say that because I'm his mom, but the other school was $70,000 more over 4 years. And I looked at him and said, you know, Brennan, we told you what we can afford. You're happy with both of these schools, and that's just not affordable. And he said, all right, great, I'm going to go to Indiana. So I didn't have all that stress and friction, but it was really because my husband and I set the stage. Like, we let the kids know and set those expectations and modeled good financial decision making, which is, in my opinion, worth millions of dollars for your child to learn for when they're on their own. So now you know a lot more just from this webinar than most parents will ever know. So please take that and stay in the community, stay tuned in. There's a lot coming up for you guys, and with the FAFSA changes, and we will keep you posted. We'll keep you in the loop. So everybody have a wonderful night. Thanks for being here, and we will be in touch soon. So take care. Have a good night too, Rinda.
Thanks, Peg. Yeah, have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.